Okay. Hello, everybody. We are live. So, welcome to this live stream today. I'll just close a few of these tabs right here. Today I'm streaming for the very first time. I've never done this before. So if there are any lags or issues, I apologize in advance. I'll just wait for people to get in here. Settle in, sit down, grab a tea. Okay, and today we're going to do a few things. First of all, I'm going to be sharing my screen and sharing the resources that I use with my italki students. While I do this, I'm going to talk about a few ways that you could, first of all, as italki teachers, support yourselves, and ways that you could support your students and ways that you could support me. Yeah. It all depends on your style as a teacher and what your teaching philosophy is, and we'll talk more about that after. Yeah. Aside from that, we're going to talk a little bit about the New Year's resolutions, because in the last live stream that I did earlier on in January, we were talking about New Year's resolutions, and some of you shared your New Year's resolutions with me in the comment section. So I really want to see how this is going and how you're doing with these New Year's resolutions. I'll be sharing mine as well. And then at the end, there will be a Q&A session, right? So I'll be talking for about 20 or 25 minutes, which means if you have any questions in that time, please just let me know. Yeah. Let me see what's going on with the resolution right here, because I see seems a little faulty right there. Well, I'm not much of a tech guy, so hopefully this sorts itself out. Okay. Well, hopefully this sorts itself out. And if there are any problems, I will upload another video going through all of this. Okay. All right. Fantastic. So first of all, let's start by talking about New Year's resolutions. I'll just share some of my New Year's resolutions. Some things that I wanted to do at the beginning of the year was to actually try to create more of a community with my students. Yeah. And I'm happy to say that this has been working. More or less, I've been able to create blogs, to create different fora with my students by using Blogger. And I'll show you this today, actually. And by doing this, my students have been interacting with one another in a much better way. And I've found that this has been very helpful for my students. Yeah. There seems to be... Oh, you are absolutely welcome, Tabby. Thank you for stopping by. So as for my first New Year's resolution, I have decided to try to create more of a community, and so far that's been working for my students. Another thing I've tried to do is to teach, to get to 4,000 classes. I started the year at about 3,100 classes, a bit less than that, and now I'm at 3,200 classes. So I hope by the end of the year I could hit 4,000 classes. In other news, I have changed my not changed my job, but I have another job on top of teaching on italki, and I'm actually teaching in a college right now. I'm teaching college level students, so it's going great so far. So those are a couple of the New Year's resolutions I had: to teach 4,000 lessons, which I'm on that trajectory, and number two, to create more of a community for my students, because sometimes on italki it feels like we're in these separate kind of bubbles, right? You're talking to one student at a time. And it really is nice to have more of like a community feel, right? So that definitely helps. There are a couple things that I want to start doing more, so they're kind of like delayed New Year's resolutions. One of them is to have more asynchronous activities and classes for my students. Yeah, so I've actually worked a lot on that, and I'll be going over that in the the teaching materials that I'll show you today. And that takes me to one of the ways that you could support my channel. Of course, if you've subscribed, thank you very much, and it's much appreciated. Definitely, if you're a patron on my Patreon account, which I'll show you today, that is very, very much appreciated as well. But another thing that you could do, especially if you're learning English, is to actually go on over to YouTube, click on EnglishTeacherRyan, and you could subscribe to my new channel. This is my new channel right here where I hope to be creating videos just like these ones right here, but these videos will actually be for students, to teach students English. So I really hope that helps my students out, and if you're interested, consider subscribing to that channel right there. All right. This is also where I post videos which are for my curricula, actually. And we'll be diving into that a little bit later on today. All right. Just plug in my laptop. Another New Year's resolution that I have that's kind of delayed a little bit is to actually focus more on Kahoot. I have an account on Kahoot, which I'll show to you right here, and I make Kahoots with my students. Basically, I get my students to create glossaries, and then I create these little quizzes with my students so that they could complete different activities which target the vocabulary from their glossaries. So for example, if we go to Jamboard right here, I could go to Google Jamboard. These are all of my students' glossaries here, and there are even more in this account right here. Don't ask me why the accounts are separate. So if we go to Victor's right here, these are his words for his glossary. He could add any words he would like to, and then I basically get these words and bring them to Kahoot and make them into different quizzes. So is Kahoot free? It absolutely is free. You could use it for free. It has some limitations and some restrictions, but it is free if you want to do basically more or less what I do on Kahoot, right? And if you want to see more, we could go to Julian's. You could see some of the, just fill in the blank activities. That's kind of what I create for my students, right? Yeah. So it is free. However, I pay for the premium version because it gives me access to other functions, which I don't have with the free version. Yeah. Unfortunately, Kahoot is one of those things where like each time you upgrade to what you think is the highest level or highest tier, there's another tier that's even higher. So I upgraded thinking I'd have access to these functions right here, and guess what? I don't, unfortunately, right? So yeah, that's a little bit disappointing, but for the most part, Kahoot allows you to create quizzes, create games, and it's very useful for your students, especially if you have many students. Yeah. And I use these for IELTS, I use these for general English and conversational English, and we'll go more into that today. All right. So I want to focus more on Kahoot, and I want to begin making Kahoots, discard all. I want to begin making Kahoots which target certain levels instead of just targeting specific students. So right now I have Kahoots which are just targeting specific students, right? Like I have a Kahoot for, let's say, Alex and a Kahoot for Victor. That takes a lot of time, right? So I like to kind of compile these together and to have Kahoots, which are for all B1 students or all IELTS Band 7 students, for example. So that's the next thing that I have on the menu. Yeah. So that is in the works. And if anybody has any questions of Kahoot, just let me know. All right. Okay, great. Another thing I was talking about before is the community aspect that I'm trying to create with my students. So let's go to Blogger right here. I have how many posts? 150 posts. Basically, on my Blogger, I have a post for each and every class, which I'll be going over today. These are classes in my curriculum. But I also have homework blogs. So for example, this one right here. Tell me about a proverb from your native country that means a lot to you. Yeah. So if we go back, we could click on view. And I've given this homework task to different students. So you could see by this point, it's starting to fill up. Like there's still not that many comments. But I only began doing this about a month ago or maybe 2 months ago. So I'm really happy with how things are going so far. And again, it's giving my students the ability to speak with other students, to communicate with other students, right? With these homework blogs, with these fora. Another thing I've done is actually create a Telegram chat. Yeah. So if you create a WhatsApp a chat or a Telegram chat, that could be a great way to get your students more, get them involved in the community. Yeah. Okay, and that brings me to the second part of this live stream today. I'd like to talk about some applications and some websites which I use with my students, which I find helpful, and I wish I knew about them sooner, okay? And they're quite underrated as well, okay? So I thought this was important to mention since we're diving into, we're talking about teaching materials today. We are online language teachers, most of us, right? And maybe you're not, and maybe you just want to find out if you want to teach on italki. And I really hope that this gives you the motivation to teach on italki or Preply or whatever, whichever online teaching platform you'd like to teach on. All right, so the first underrated app that I want to talk about is Anki. And I am starting with this one because I think it's the least underrated out of all the apps that I'm going to talk about today. Anki, I've heard about it a lot actually, so it's not completely underrated, but it's still not at the point of at the level of like Duolingo, for example, right? So I think that Anki is very useful. I'm using it with my students. You could create flashcards on Anki. You could create decks. It's not perfect, but I actually love the simplicity of it. It doesn't take up much storage. I could basically create different decks. They're flashcards. So on one side you have the definition of a word. On the other side you have the word, right? Or you could do it with translation. You could have the French term on one side and the Spanish term on the other if you're French and you're learning Spanish, etc. I used it as a language student, probably a little bit too much. I got a little bit addicted to Anki, but I just wanted to start off with that one because it's very simple and I'm using it with my students, and I think that it could be a great tool to use. All right, so I'll be making videos in the future going more in depth with these apps, but let's just breeze on through them. So that's Anki. The second underrated app I want to talk about is called lyricstraining.com. So I'll just show you all lyricstraining.com. I've practiced it with Italian and other languages. So you could go here to English, and basically they give you these different music videos. You could watch the music video and explain if you're beginner, intermediate, advanced, or expert. And as the music video is playing, you basically type out the lyrics. Yeah. So it's kind of like fill in the blanks. You could type out the lyrics. And I think that this is a great resource for your students to use on their own. And that's one of the things I want to drive home to you all today is that from my experience, one of the most important things that I have learned is that it's important for your students, like 90% of the improvement happens outside of the gym, as they say. And it's the same with the classroom as well. So it's not just about what you do in the classroom, but it's also about the homework you're giving your students, the plans you're making with your students. And also, if you're giving them some of these hidden gems, as I call them, then that could give them ways to practice outside of the class, and hopefully it will give them a lot more motivation as well. So it's basically let the apps work for you. Let the students teach themselves, give them the resources, and let them take control of their learning. Yeah. So lyrics training, maybe I'm a bit biased because I've used this as a student as well, but I really like this one for listening practice. The third one I want to talk about is called Babadoom. All right, and I'll just write all these down here in the chat. So lyrics training, Anki, Babadoom. Babadoom is just a fun little app, or a fun little website right here. I'm not sure if they have an app for it actually. I would have never stumbled upon this, but it's just so fun. You could play and just practice, looking at the word and explaining which word it is, and they tell you if it's correct or incorrect, right? So yeah, I found that this is just very easy, especially for practicing with nouns. But there are verbs and adjectives on here as well. But for practicing with nouns, like actual objects, especially like everyday household kind of objects, they could be very useful. So I'm a big I'm a big fan of Babadoom for sure. I use it as a student, and again, if you could show this to your students, they could just use it on their own, right? Another thing you could use, absolutely, if you're a fan of making quizzes and maybe Kahoot isn't the thing for you, you'd like it to be simpler and more straightforward, check out Sporkle. Sporkle is great for creating quizzes, especially if it's just kind of like mix and match quizzes. For example, if I go to like Sporkle irregular verbs, again, I'm just trying to focus on the apps that I find are kind of like they're hiding in plain sight. That's all, just in case if you haven't come across them before. So see, it's just kind of fill in the blanks, and you just have to write the correct answer in these different slots. And you could create them as well. And I've created them as a student too, from my self-directed teaching. Okay, we'll go through a couple more and then we'll get started with the learning materials today, okay? The next one that I want to talk about is Telegram. Most of you probably know Telegram. Telegram is a messenger, kind of similar to WhatsApp. Messengers aren't that common. I don't find that they're so common in Canada, with at least not in my circle of friends. Messengers meaning any messenger aside from Facebook Messenger. So when we talk about WhatsApp is gaining traction, but I find that it was more common with a lot of my friends who are international students rather than domestic students, like people from Canada. So I found that pretty interesting. It's gaining traction now. And Telegram, I only know about it because of some of my classmates and some of my students who are from Russia. I use it with my students, but your students could also just use it to learn. For example, they could follow different newspapers and they could get daily articles or posts just to practice their reading. So I would definitely suggest Telegram to them. And if you like, create a Telegram group with your students. Why the heck not, right? That's what I've done. I don't send too much to my students. I'll send them maybe just a little article I found interesting every few days. And that pretty much that's pretty much it. But I don't want to overdo it, right? Okay, aside from that, Reddit and Quora I found recently to be fantastic resources. Reddit and Quora, getting my students to go onto fora, because before that I would just send my students articles, right? And articles are fantastic, but for the most part, it's just one person writing. Like, it's one person's opinion or one person's report the whole time. By exposing your students to Reddit or to Quora, your student will be able to kind of see how ideas are co-constructed, and to see different debates in action, right? So I think that could be useful to students, and I found them to be useful for my students. Okay, last one's right here. Any real world task. Oh, sorry. So let me put Quora and Reddit. And any real world tasks. So another thing I've began doing recently is getting my students to go onto IMDb or Remax or Indeed.com. I don't know why I'm capitalizing all of it. Okay, IMDb is, you could also do Goodreads. And I'll be talking more about this in my when I go over my materials, which I'll share with you today. IMDb is a movie review website, right? And if you get your students to go onto IMDb and maybe do some reading and reiterate the information to you, or maybe to get them to actually review a movie or review a TV show, this is real world. This is a realistic task that your student would probably want to do anyway, right? Well, maybe not, but it's definitely, these different sites could be used in different ways for real world tasks, as I call them, real world virtual tasks. Remax is for house hunting, where you could find homes. And I find this one to be fun. You could ask your students to go on to Remax and to, imagine that they're moving to a certain place. It could be Spain. It could be, well, I don't know if Remax is big in Spain actually, but it could be a different part of Canada, for example, and get them to find a few homes, like actual homes that they'd be interested in moving to, right? Indeed.com, this is for job hunting, right? So you could get your students to maybe find a few job postings and to explain which ones they are or are not qualified for. And Goodreads is for to review books, right? So your students could do virtually the same thing, but with books. Another thing you could do is a TripAdvisor, for example, right? And get them to review, or Airbnb, right? Like, the list goes on. Basically, it's thinking about what your students would typically want to do online anyways, right? And to try to add a little spin on that so that they could learn English, right? So far, like, this may be obvious to all of you, but this came as a revelation to me. I was like, holy jumping, like, IMDb. I could use Goodreads. Like, when it came to me, it was just like a light bulb moment. So I find that this could be, that this could potentially be useful to you and to your students. All right. Okay, so that is my piece for the websites, the underrated websites and applications for online language teachers, especially for italki teachers. So now let's move on to the next part. I'm going to show all of you some of the materials which I use in my italki classes. Every teacher has their own style. So these materials may not work for you. You may not find them useful, and that's completely fine, right? Today, it's about motivating ourselves to find out what works for us as teachers and what works for our students, right? But the important thing here is the fact that I have taught 3,200 lessons on italki, and a lot of those classes were used, a lot of those classes had me using these resources, right? So I could kind of give you a little bit of my own anecdotal experience and to tell you what has worked for me, what has worked with my italki students. All right. Okay, great. So let's get started. So Well, most of you were enjoying your New Year's holidays, if you have New Year's holidays in your countries. I was working like a dog, because I am a total nerd, creating all of this syllabi right here. Okay. So this curricula, just to let you know, all of it is available on my Patreon account. It depends on your membership level. Some of these are absolutely free on my account, and I'll show you a little bit more about that after, so you could see the free ones. Some of them all patrons could get. So to become a patron, you only need to pay as little as $1 per month. Yeah, $1 USD per month. And if you want unlimited access to all the materials, $7 a month, right? Okay, great. So we'll talk more about that after. And also, if you're interested, here, I'll just share this in the chat right here. And also, if you're interested, I do also have a Teachers Pay Teachers account. Teachers Pay Teachers. So on demand. Exactly, and you could find all the resources there as well. Okay, beautiful. So let's go through these resources. The first thing that I want to show all of you is the General English A2 syllabus. Okay, this syllabus is 25 lessons. All right, and I really started developing this in maybe August, and I finished developing it, well, pretty much at the beginning of this month. I will still be adding more things to this to make it even more specific, to make it even more useful to you all as well. But this is what I've found has worked very well with my students. So let's go to the A2 teaching syllabus. And by the way, this is available on my Patreon account for as little as $1 a month. Okay, so here we are. This is the online English language teaching syllabus right here. And by the way, I have a syllabus like this for B1 level, B2 level, and C1 level as well. So I've basically separated this into units, okay? So this is graded, I should tell you first. For example, 20% are homework tasks, 20% participation and attendance, 10% SoundCloud uploads. So I'll explain all that after. And by the way, if you have any questions, just put them in the box below, and I'll ideally answer them at the end during the Q&A part. Oops, I obviously made a mistake there. All right, so as I said, there are 25 lessons. However, only 20 of them happen in class, which means your students have a choice to complete 5 lessons asynchronously, okay? I'll explain more about the asynchronous aspect a little bit after. Let me just zoom in so it's easier to see, okay? Each and every lesson, okay, so if we go through right here, I'll just zoom out for a second. Each and every lesson has a primer. So this is a video where I explain what they're going to be doing in the class, okay? And all of the primers, all of these videos are on my other YouTube channel, EnglishTeacherRyan, and I see a few of you have already subscribed, so thank you very much. I also give my students a pre-lesson reading. All right, just an article that could kind of expose them to what they'll be doing. And then there's an asynchronous blog. So here's the catch. If this is one of the 5 lessons that they chose to do asynchronously and not in class, it's absolutely free for them. All they have to do, so for example, let's say they go down and they say fashion. I'm not interested in fashion. I don't want to talk about it in class with Ryan. I don't want to pay my money for that to be one of the 20 lessons in this course. Okay, it's one of the 5 asynchronous. So here's what they would do. They would come here and they would basically complete these tasks right here. Okay, they'd complete these tasks in their own blogger. So they wouldn't comment on this blog right here, but they complete it in their own blog account, and then I would look at it after. So they're not going to be dedicating 60 minutes or something like that. And again, this is where all of these blogs, this is what all of these blogs are for. You see there are 150 blogs. Each and every one of them, I have developed an asynchronous lesson. So for example, asynchronous lesson 20, 19, 18, 17. I've done it for all the A2 level courses, all the C1 level courses, all the B2 level courses, and even my IELTS courses as well, which I'll take you through one of them in just a moment. All right. So if they do decide to actually learn in class, that they want to have an in-class class, a synchronous class, I should say, then that's where these come in. Every single class has a speaking, listening, writing, reading, grammar, and vocabulary and pronunciation outcome. All right. And you could use a list of different activities, which I'll show you in a moment, to create these lessons, right? To basically develop these lessons. So what this syllabus gives you, it gives you an outline of different topics. It gives you videos. Well, I should say it gives myself, because I use this and I found that it's worked fantastic so far. So it's given me all of these virtual, like online resources in a very organized, if I do say so myself, manner, right? And it also gives assignments, right? So it gives graded assignments. So let's go to the bottom right here. These are some of the assignments which I give my students. Each and every class, I will give them a homework task. That's just written homework. And they will get 2% they'll get 1% for finishing that for each class, each synchronous class. They also get 1% for participation and showing up. 5% for asynchronous lessons, so basically 1% for each of those blog posts. Then every second class, they'll get a SoundCloud upload assignment, so they need to upload something onto SoundCloud. Every second lesson, they will have a blog post. And then I have a few larger assignments, such as the e-portfolio, the research project, the real-world task. And then I'll throw in Kahoots every 4 lessons. And they're expected to complete a Jamboard to upload words onto their Jamboard or their glossary each lesson. Again, if you just go to my Patreon and become a patron, you'll be able to see more of all of this. And if you have any questions, please just put them in the comments below. But this is what I have been working on. I've been working like a dog over the Christmas holidays, and I was just so excited to share it all with you today, because it's been very useful so far. I found it very useful, and I've gotten good positive feedback from my students, some constructive criticism as well. For example, the Jamboard words, at first I required 50 Jamboard words for each class, so they had to add 50 words to their glossary for each class. That's a little bit steep, and my students found it tricky, so I had to adjust that, and that's no problem. Okay, so that is the A2 level syllabus right there, and it can be found on my Patreon. Now, perhaps this isn't your style. Perhaps this isn't up your alley, and that's completely fine. But this just gives you a few ideas of what you could do with your students. So if you don't like this one, create your own. That's a great idea. All of this came from my own kind of inspiration. It came from assessing what my students need, what they want, and what I feel like I could offer them, right? So even if this is not useful to you, then create your own and let me know about it. Share it in the comments section below. All right. All right, fantastic. So let's move on to another, oh, I almost closed that. Let's move on to another material that I have. Recently on my Patreon, I've been creating activities. So different documents with lists of activities. I have them for 20 listening activities, 20 speaking activities, 20 reading. Again, if you subscribe to my Patreon for as little as $1 a month, then you'll get access to these. And if you subscribe to the unlimited access tier, then you'll get unlimited access, right? So activities. So if we just click on speaking activities, for example, yeah, that's unlimited. This gives you 20 speaking activities, which you could do with your students. So basically what you would do is assess one of these classes, well, each of these classes. So you'll look at what the speaking outcome is, what the listening outcome is, and then have a look through this document and try to think which of these activities could you kind of tailor, could you apply to that given topic, to that given lesson. So I did this so that teachers who are interested in the resources and teachers who follow me online and support me could have a sort of choice as to how they plan these lessons, right? So I kind of give you the tools and you could throw them together however you would like, okay? Awesome. So those are 20 speaking activities, but as you see here, we have one document with 80 activities, so they have all the listening, speaking, reading, writing activities, and you could find that on my Teachers Pay Teachers account right here. For $5 you could get all 80 of them. All right, fantastic. So it's a great way to support the channel, it's a great way to support me, but at the same time I just want to kind of make sure that this is said. All of you are supporting me just by watching this video right now. So if you're not supporting me on Patreon, be sure to subscribe and to share this video, to share the channel, and I truly appreciate it. All right, so I'll show you one more material which I use. It's for IELTS. Actually, I'll show you two because I've gone over what I use with my general English students. So I'll go over the IELTS one and the conversational English one, and then we'll have a Q&A and I'll answer all of your questions, okay? So this will be super quick because basically the IELTS is pretty similar to the general English. So for the IELTS resources, again, some of them are up on my Patreon. If not, they're up on the Teachers Pay Teachers. But basically, you would go to one of these documents right here. So let's have a look. Maybe we could do Teachers Band 7. Yeah, because this is the magic number, right? For a lot of you who teach IELTS, you'll know that Band 7 is like the magic number. The vast majority of your students are trying to make that great leap forward between Band 6 or Band 6.5 to Band 7, right? So basically, I started with an IELTS, like a general IELTS curriculum, and I ran into the problem which most of you would guess I'd run into. The fact that I have different level students, like some of them are trying to get Band 6, some of them are trying to get Band 7 or Band 8. So what I ended up doing is sectioning this off into different bands, right? So now what I have one for like Band 8 speaking, one for Band 7 writing, etc., etc. And most of my students are speaking or writing students, so I basically have materials for Band 6, 7, 8 in speaking and 6, 7, 8 in writing, but in the future I'll develop some for listening and reading as well. So if we go through here, it's quite similar. The only difference is that there's no, first of all, it's a 10 lesson course. The marking is a little bit different, all right? So basically I have participation, grades for participation, and then I have SoundCloud upload 3% per class. For speaking, of course, this is very important that they're practicing their speaking. So it's 3% a pop. Blog posts, that's optional, right? So basically they have an option to either do 2 homework tasks, which would be, for example, IELTS Part 1 and IELTS Part 2. Or they could do 1 homework task, so 1 IELTS writing, and 1 blog post. Or they could just do blog posts. It really depends if they are also taking my writing course or if they're only taking the speaking course. You see what I mean? Now, why would I give them the option, even writing students, why would I give them the option to complete blog posts? Well, the reason why is because from 4 years of being an IELTS preparation instructor, I have found that some students have kind of limited themselves, and they find themselves in this kind of like IELTS box or IELTS bubble where they are constantly, everything that they know about English is IELTS. And obviously IELTS is not completely authentic English, and it's not completely real world English, right? So I find that creating blog posts and having them answer to those blog posts, comment on the blogger blog posts, that could be useful as well. So if I go to IELTS here, I even have different IELTS blogs, like look through this list of questions and choose topics that you would like to work on more in class, right? That's one example there. Okay, so as we go through this, as I said, the marking is a little bit different because it's only 10 lessons. But then for each lesson, they basically have the option of completing it on my YouTube channel, EnglishTeacherRyan. So if they'd like to, they could click on this right here, and they could watch this video, and then they could, the blog, where's the blog? And there should be a blog link down here. Perhaps I didn't put it for that one. But in any case, okay, I'll have to put that after. But in any case, they watch the video and then they're able to complete the blog. So they'll watch the video and I'll explain everything to them about how to complete the blog post, and then they'll go to my blogger, which is absolutely free. It doesn't cost any money. They'll go to IELTS Speaking, for example. And they'll go to IELTS Speaking 7. Oops, that's the wrong one. There's the IELTS Speaking. IELTS Speaking, here we go. Yeah. So they'll go to this one right here and they'll complete the activities. So these activities are just so that if we do not finish all of the activities in class, then they're able to complete the activities on their own time. Yeah. And it's free. So I'm basically teaching them without physically being there. That was one of my New Year's resolutions, to have more asynchronous activities. And now I'm letting the videos teach themselves. So if you find this useful, you could feel free to scoop one of these resources up off my Patreon or Teachers Pay Teachers, or create something similar to this for your own students if you have the time. All right. So it's 10 lessons right here. Each lesson will have lexical resource, grammar, fluency, and pronunciation outcomes. Yeah. And and all of the explanations of the tasks are right there at the end. Yeah. And SoundCloud uploads are very important. I found that this has really helped my students. Okay. So that's it for IELTS. So we'll look at one more thing and then we will chat and I'll answer some of your questions. Okay, so the final thing is conversational English. Okay, on my Patreon, you could find for absolutely free 300 topics for online English lessons. Okay, these are 300 random topics, completely random, and I put them into different sets. So for example, set 1, monarchy, science, the circus. They have nothing to do with each other. I just put random topics, first things that came to mind, found a few pre-reading articles or videos, and I send one of these sets to my students before each class, and they could choose what they like to speak about. Now, something that I've done recently, and I've put it on Patreon and Teachers Pay Teachers, something that I realized is that some students want conversational English, but they also, they want specific topics, you know? So some of them are very business oriented. for example. So they want to have conversational English, but they want it to be based on business related topics. So this is literally what I created yesterday, 90 business related topics. And now this is what I'm going to start sending to my business students, right? So I try to drive it home, the fact that this is not business English, in the sense it's not general English, it's not English for specific purposes. It is not an organized, structured class with activities like the general English document you saw before. No, this is conversational English. It's informal. It's an italki conversational class. But we'll talk about one of these topics. So your students could feel free. Well, you could feel free if you get this document. Oops, I have to fix the numbering here. To send them, shopping scams, Christmas campaigning. I think all the numbers are wrong because I edited the former document, the one with 300 lessons, and I just shortened it so that I kept the business related topics. So this realistically should be, for example, 1, 2, 3. And this is one of the things when you're creating all of these resources. Sometimes you have to go back over it and So that's another thing that I've learned that I've began doing with my students. But again, you could find my 300 topics on Patreon for free. And that's just a way of giving back to all of you. So just to recap, just before I answer some of these questions here, we went over some different underrated apps and websites that I use with my students. I showed you 4 documents. One of them was for A2 General English, but I do have B1, B2, and C1 English as well. I showed you one of the IELTS syllabi, right, which is for IELTS Band 7, Target Band 7 speaking, and it's a 10 lesson syllabus, and that's one of 6 syllabi that I use for IELTS with my students. And I showed you a little bit of the conversational English and what I do with them. I guess before we move on, just before we go to the Q&A, I should explain how I conduct the conversational lessons with my students. So just to let you know, with my conversational lessons, I give my students the option. So this is what I would send them in the first trial lesson. I send them this resource which kind of explains how the conversational lessons work, and they have the option to engage in assignments, engage in the graded version of, sorry, I can't speak today, to complete the graded version of the course, right? So they could either have no grades, completely ungraded, which answers one of the questions that was put in the YouTube, in the chat there. Some students don't want to be graded. That's absolutely true. I find that probably about 5% of my students don't want to be graded. The other 95% do. So for the assignments, for conversational English, it's optional. They could either opt into it or they don't have to. If they do, this is basically how I conduct these lessons right here. And I give them a progress report, just like I do for the IELTS and general English. So I give each of my students one of these spreadsheets, and it just kind of keeps track of their marks. I have a different one for IELTS and a different one for general English. Yeah, there's so much to go over. So that's pretty much it. Basically today what I wanted to do is just explain to all of you, because I did make a video earlier in November about creating a curriculum for italki. Not all teachers do this. I'm in the minority, clearly, right? So don't feel pressure to do this. I do this because I like it, because I enjoy it. That's the reason why I do it. And I find that it's better personalized for my students. And I haven't been able to find any textbooks that do this. That's why I created this, right? But in that video that I made in November, it wasn't completely in depth it didn't go too deep into the process of creating a curriculum. It was kind of very general and vague. So the reason why I did this today is so that you could see more so, like in more depth, how I create my curricula and how you could create curricula as well. So with that being said, let's answer some of these questions. I'm opening it up to the Q&A. I'll hang around for about 20 minutes today. So let's start with the first question here. Lightbringer. Do students want to be graded? I imagine some would not. Yep. As I explained, I ask my students, I give them the option, do you want homework? Do you want to be graded or not? And 95% of them do. I asked them again after 2, 3, 4 lessons. Pretty much I check up with them, each lesson to ask them, do you find this helpful? Is this useful to you? What do you think about our classes? Is there anything you'd like to change? The only constructive criticism I've gotten, even after using anonymous polls and Google Forms for surveys, even after that, the only feedback I got is that Jamboard is a little bit too demanding. 50 words for each lesson is too much, so let's dial it down. So basically I took that feedback and now I only give my student, I tell my students you could put as many words as you want, but you have to put at least 5, because if not, then you're not doing anything, you're not doing the task. So whether they use Anki, Google Jamboard, or Google Keep for their glossary, they have to put at least 5 words per class. Pedro says, great ideas, thank you very much. And Julian says, for IELTS, if a student is pressed for time, which topics would be most appropriate for them to learn before the test? Great question, and I'm going to show you my favorite resource for IELTS, because we all know that there are many IELTS resources online which are just riddled with errors, grammatical and lexical errors, and some of them actually aren't very accurate nor realistic to how the test really is. So this is my favorite one right here. Okay, IELTS vocabulary. I even use this with some of my general English lessons, and this actually informed how I developed my lessons in general on italki. This is kind of the bread and butter. A lot of these topics are just the bread and butter, the meat and potatoes of IELTS topics and of English speaking topics, like language topics in general, right? So you could cover a lot with these right here. So I hope you find that helpful, Julian. Just close all of these. Okay. I see somebody drop by and wave. That's awesome. Yeah. Great stuff. All right, so if anybody else has a question, go ahead and fire them away in the chat. As I said, I'll be hanging around for another few minutes, and I know that's a lot of information. IMAX, you're back. Nice to see ya. How do you reinforce taught grammar rules during conversation practice? Good question. First of all, conversation, a lot of students don't understand this, and after sitting down with dozens, probably 50 italki teachers like yourselves, who have told me about this, I know that a lot of students don't understand that conversational practice on italki is typically informal conversation, and it's not it doesn't have a lot of set activities and a lot of structure, but to each their own, right? To some teachers, they do have that, right? So to answer your question, I don't reinforce grammar rules typically in conversational lessons because it's just for conversation. However, I know it could help my students, and I know some of my students, let's be real, they take conversational English because it's a little bit cheaper than the general English, right? So some of them want to get they want to get the quality of general English or IELTS English without paying for that, right? So I make it very clear to them, and I actually don't run into these issues because I have a syllabus, right? So they know exactly what they're going to get. They know there's not going to be set like grammar activities. But I understand this reality, and plus I have been able to develop a lot of activities on the fly that I could do with my students to quickly review grammar without having to prepare for the lesson. So to answer your question, the way that I reinforce these grammar rules is to find a list of questions, conversational questions, which elicit these grammar forms and grammar structures. I will look through because I found a really good website for you that I use, but I forget what it's called. Conversational Questions to Elicit Grammar. I think it's this one right here. Yep, exactly. So if there's anything here, like for example, adjectives of ed, ing, this is something that I notice with a lot of my students. They make mistakes with this. I'll just ask them some of these questions here, and they will naturally and organically be practicing those rules. So to answer your question, that is the resource which I use for that. But I don't have real structured conversational lessons which practice these rules. Maybe I'll practice for 5 minutes at the beginning, and then, for example, I'll just show you what I do with my students. Maybe I could go to Dennis's right here. Just for any of you who don't know my style, I create a Google Doc here. So at the top, it explains what kind of course it is. I have the Jamboard, the SoundCloud, the progress report with all of the marks. And each class at the top, the student will decide. Sorry, here, let's go to this one. Cool. So I'll give my students options for the next class, right? And then they'll decide at the beginning of the next class what they'd like to speak about. So in this case, cultural assimilation. Great. And then I'll have a vocabulary section where I'll give them vocabulary tips, a grammar section, a pronunciation section, a positive feedback section, a constructive criticism section, and recommendations. Sometimes I fill these up, sometimes I don't. Depends how motivated I feel and how much my students need the feedback. So with this student, he is incredibly motivated. So I'm very thorough with my feedback, and I just kind of review this with my student at the end of each class. So that's another way that I reinforce this progress, I guess you could say. All right. Any other questions? Hey, Haley, thanks for stopping by. Haley has a student who is mostly focused on improving her writing and reading comprehension. She's 14, and her goal is to improve her performance on tests in her English class at school. I want to use semi-authentic text, but I also need it to be accessible for her age and level. Yep, interesting. That's great. Well, if you have any suggestions, because I know that you're a very experienced teacher, Haley, if you have any suggestions for resources, feel free to throw them down in the chat. And for anybody who who's interested in research in second language acquisition and research-based and research-supported pedagogy, feel free to check out Haley's channel. It's called Classable ESL. Hope you don't mind that I gave you a little plug there, Haley. All right. So if nobody else has any questions, then we'll wrap up right there. It's 11 on the dot here in Canada in, well, 2 hours out of Toronto. I'll probably go for some sledding or tobogganing today after I finish my homework. No classes today. All right, fantastic. So just in a nutshell, feel free to check out my Patreon. I upload low cost for as little as $1 a month resources on there. You could get unlimited access for $7 a month. Even put free resources on there as well. Feel free to check out my Teachers Pay Teachers account as well if that interests you. Again, I create all these for the fun of it. It's my Teachers Pay Teachers. I'll send you my Patreon right here. Awesome. And of course, check out my other YouTube channel, which I actually put my first video up right there. You could, well, first video, I have about 150 videos on there for my teaching, but these will be for more general purposes for the general public. All right. As always, thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate all the support that I get from this community. I can't believe the amount of the amount of people who watch my videos. So thank you. I really appreciate it. A lot of this is just for a hobby, but it's also to help people. So I really appreciate the support from you all, and I love you guys. If you have any suggestions on videos that you'd like for me to make, please just let me know. All right. If you'd ever like to sit down for a consultation, check out this Calendly link. You can find me on Calendly. Just go right here. Send this to you quick. Yeah, you could go ahead and book a 30-minute consultation right there. All right. And I will see you all in the next video. So keep smiling. All right.